Welcome to the Burnout Recovery Podcast, a guiding resource dedicated to healthcare professionals on their journey to overcoming burnout. Spearheaded by Dr. Jo Braid, a certified professional coach and rehabilitation physician.
Hello and welcome back to the Burnout Recovery Podcast. I'm really delighted to have you here today. How did you enjoy last week's episode on simplicity? It resonated quite well with quite a few people. I got some good feedback about some really tangible takeaways from that. Now, today we're talking about why a 1% improvement matters. This topic came up because my 13-year-old son said, "Hey, Mum, I'd love a copy of the 1% Better Everyday Journal. I'm not affiliated. There's no connection with that." I was actually a bit blown away that he came to me saying he would like a journal, not the digital version, but the book version, please, Mum. So we have ordered the 1% Better Everyday Journal. It is yet to arrive, but that prompted me to think about the relatability of going for that small improvement every day and what a great strategy it is for burnout recovery. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by big changes or struggling to make progress in your burnout recovery journey, today's episode is especially made for you. So I've got a story here about a client I worked with. She was a surgeon who had a clinic a certain day of the week, and she had patients who traveled very long distances for their much awaited appointment. During clinic, she aimed to do all the investigations, education, and plan, mainly within one session. How was this going? Well, she was running overtime. She was irritable with staff members. She was absolutely exhausted when she came home. And so this was an area that she brought to coaching, and we lasered in with some strategies to work on in there. And I guess we did use the 1% improvement approach, although I didn't actually call it that approach then. We really started with the flow of patients in the clinic list and arranging a break for herself in the middle to pause, to hydrate, and to check in. She then changed her expectations and those of her patients to doing some investigations, passing over some investigations a colleague could organise, and arranging a follow-up plan so it didn't all have to happen in that one appointment. She really gained a sense of control. It felt much more planned. She had backup, and she felt much more compassionate towards herself with setting this up. It was a really manageable approach, and she continued to have high quality surgical care. So I want to introduce the concept of 1% improvement as an alternative to dramatic overhauls. And here is one of my inspirations who I quote often, James Clear, author of Atomic Habits. If you get 1% better each day for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better by the time you're done. To me, that sounds like a really worthwhile approach and a good strategy to use. And when we're thinking about burnout recovery, I like to, almost look in the mirror and assess or reflect on how burnout doesn't happen overnight. It is sometimes called like 1,000 paper cuts, and that takes a lot of time. It just happens over months, if not years. And so that's how taking a 1% improvement approach is such a great sort of strategy to recover from burnout. And that will really compound with time. I'm going to give you a neuroscience analogy here because I thought a medical analogy for the 1% improvement might be really relatable for you, my audience, that by being consistent, that's the bedrock of habit formation. And by repeating a behavior regularly, you reinforce neural pathways in your brain and making the action more automatic to a degree. And really aiming for small, consistent efforts rather than sporadic, intense bursts of activity is more likely to contribute to habit change. And that's some of the work that we do in coaching as well, for sure. So the neuroscience works, you know how these nerves work and the neuroplasticity that we have in our brains. And when we repeatedly use those developing or developed pathways, they become more myelinated and better to use and more effective and easier to initiate over time. I also want to challenge this idea that I've talked about before, the all or nothing mindset that can be so common in healthcare. That really ties in with the perfectionist mindset we can have and a very black and white, well, I have to do it this way or it's not worth doing at all. And when we can introduce the 1% improvement, is more like, okay, if I was just going to work on one little thing today, what could that be? And it's not looking at everything or the whole lot of things, but just one thing slightly differently. And I've got some practical application for you now for 3 areas in your life where 1% improvement can be applied. Let's start off with energy management. I would say energy is the currency that most people in burnout find they're really depleted in, and that's what they really want to get back. Burnout recovery is all about what's in your energy cup. And instead of trying to completely overhaul your sleep schedule, what if you went to bed just 5 minutes earlier? And how will you know you're doing this? Well, maybe you've never set a bedtime alarm. I've talked about this before, but we're pretty used to the wake-up time alarms. What about a bedtime alarm? Just set that 5 minutes earlier than you would usually go to bed. And that is your 1% improvement. And a client who started with this tiny shift within a month, those 5 minutes had naturally expanded to 30 minutes because it felt so good. And my client wasn't fighting herself. She was allowing small, sustainable change. So that's one sort of self-care one you might want to start with. Here's one for the workplace. Workplace boundaries. For example, one small no per day. I see clients who are healthcare professionals who struggle with boundaries all the time. And it's not something that we're taught during our training, even during our specialty training. And it's such a fundamental approach for both burnout recovery and burnout prevention. So how can you start with just one small no each day? Maybe it's declining to take on an extra task that isn't truly urgent, or saying, I'll get to that tomorrow instead of staying late. One of my clients started by simply saying, I need to check my schedule first, instead of automatically saying yes. And that tiny pause and that small boundary began shifting her entire relationship with work. And finally, I've got a self-care routine for you. When it comes to self-care, I often hear, I don't have time for meditation, or I can't fit in an exercise class. But what about 1 minute of deep breathing between patients or while you're waiting in the coffee queue? I love sharing this because it's so doable. 1 minute, that could be 3 deep breaths. That could be your 1%. And here's the thing, once you experience how that 1 minute can reset your nervous system, you naturally start finding more moments throughout the day. Let's think about obstacles that could get in the way of these 3 areas to implement the 1% improvement. Perfectionism rears its head so often. It's a strategy that certainly helps us get to where we want to get to, and then it can really backfire and work against us. So please go to my podcast episode on imperfect consistency. That's where I'm encouraging you to be consistent and not be perfect about it. So if one day you miss it, that's all right. Get back to doing it the next day. There's also a fear of not doing enough. How is 1% going to be enough to really make a shift? Okay, yep. Well, maybe keep going for a week and then a fortnight and then a month, and then evaluate how you're going and really check in with yourself with that self-awareness. Because if we do something and don't check in with how we're going, it's sometimes hard to know the difference that we're making. So I hope those are 2 ways to get over obstacles, perfectionism and the fear of not doing enough in your 1% improvement approach. So I've gone through this concept, which comes from the Japanese concept of Kaizen, Kaizen, the idea around 1% improvement, looking at being 1% better in every day in something that you're doing compounds to 37 times better by the end of the year, according to James Clear from Atomic Habits. I hope you have picked up one simple action step that you can start today, whether that's a workplace boundary, whether that's around self-care and taking 3 deep breaths in 1 minute, or it's your energy management, which I know is so important to so many of you. If you want help in this area, reach out. My booking link is in the show notes. You can book in for a free discovery call, and I'll look forward to meeting you and hear what's going on for you and where you want to get to. If you want an hour where you're going to leave with action strategies from me, book in for my Power Hour. I've got the link there for you too. And that is an hour of coaching. So guys, thank you so much for listening today. I hope you're having a great day. And if you think somebody else might benefit from this 1% improvement approach for burnout recovery, please share this podcast episode with them. Take care. I'll speak to you again next week. Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode. Schedule a free discovery call if you want to learn how I can help you. Dive right in with my 60-minute burnout strategy session, or experience Program Vitality, my tailored one-on-one burnout recovery program. All information is available at drjobraid.com with links in the show notes.